Hello everyone, and welcome to this video where we are examining some opening theory this time around. What I want to do is I want to start a kind of collection of videos where I'm, building up my own opening repertoire and comparing that repertoire, my existing repertoire, to what top players are doing at the moment. This game is the game between Vidit and Makoto Rodwell from the 2022 Olympiad in Chennai, China, in Chennai, India, and it's from round one. And the game has some interesting turns. I'm looking at this from the black side since I play the King's Indian with the black pieces. This game turned into a King's Indian Bayonet Attack. Always dangerous, always something that you have to be really prepped up for as black. I definitely think it's one of the most testing tries against the King's Indian with the white pieces. Although I think I certainly have a good response to it, and I will say that I think that it was a little bit mishandled in this game by I am Rodwell. But that said, I'm certain that I would have just lost to Vidit in a different fashion. Game begins, knight f3. I think Vidit was looking to sort of transpose into something else, maybe try to get opponent out of book. Usually people play knight f3, c4, trying to get into a Catalan. Not my Catalan move order, but all this is totally cool and normal stuff. We finally transpose into a mainline King's Indian here. What can be said? Yeah, there are a few major moves here. You'll see Stockfish is liking b4, but that's simply because we've put b4 in its brain. Main moves here are probably knight e1 and knight d2. Knight d2 is personally that I struggle with the most, and actually ends up very similar to the bayonet because you end up knight d2 a5, and it gets similar treatment simply because the knight has a more active access to the queen side on d2 than it does on e1. Knight e1 is what we love to see as King's Indian players. The kingside pawn storm simply begins very easily and very quickly. With double-sided play for both sides, it's not like it's lost for white or something. But the bayonet is basically saying I'm not going to waste time moving my knights and deciding where it's going to go. I'm just going to get that queenside attack going immediately. It's not sacrificing material. It's not a gambit. It's just a move, and one that should be respected. A5, standard response. Rook takes. All of this is normal. And then here is where I am Rodwell did deviate from what I would play. Personally, I would play knight e8, and the idea is knight e8 shores up a lot of the weaknesses in the black camp. It keeps the long eye of this bishop towards the king side, and this rook doesn't really want to be on the king side, queen side in the first place. And if the rook does ever want to get contact with the queenside pawns, queenside weaknesses, this rook does that through f7, not by being on the back rank. So with that in mind, I think knight e8 is just an improved version of knight d7. There's another fault of knight d7. I think I mentioned this. Knight d7 cuts off the eye of the bishop. So now you have to be really careful about getting an f5, because if knight d7 and then you imagine f5 in this position, knight g5, knight e6 is working because this knight's blocking our bishop. Other moves that are in the position, the Stockfish likes rook a8. Opening book says that's been played before, it's fine. Another idea is knight h5. The idea behind knight h5 is to bring the knight to f4, so this way we're either picking up this bishop here, which is one of white's best attacking pieces in terms of consolidation and moving pieces on the king side, queen side, or also simply to take and then install that weakness and begin our queen side attack, king side attack. So knight h5, sort of normal stuff, but I think that knight e8 is the better. It's just such a harmonious move. Shoring up those pawns, and it harmonizes nicely with the bishop, and it sort of coincides with our idea behind what is the role of the king's rook in the king's Indian. In any case, the game with knight e8 could continue. Bishop a3, main move. b6, the idea is to stop the c5 break. And now we sort of move around. And you can sort of see here how these early knight moves by white are not doing so much simply because we're shoring up our weaknesses. And it'll remain that way for a while. A lot of what you're doing in the King's Indian is you're trying to get 2 steps on the king side for every 1 step that white's making on the queen side. So any move that you can make that delays by 1 or 2 moves white's queen side advance is time, extra time that you're able to spend on your own king side attack. And the reason why this is so enormously effective is that we can sacrifice enormous amounts of material on the queen side, but white cannot sacrifice enormous amounts of material on the king side. So if I'm threatening checkmate in 3, but white's threatening to trap my rook on a8, I don't really care, do I? Because checkmate's the end of the game. So any slight delay that you can make towards white's queenside advance usually pays dividends in the King's Indian, which is again another perk of knight e8. It just does such a good job of shoring up those weaknesses. The line continues, but I know this particular line about 21 moves deep, but we won't give all of our opening prep away just here. So I am Rodwell and Vidit Gujarati GM. Vidit Gujarati finished the game this way, continued the game this way. And this is sort of the moment that I really want to talk about. Which is, as black in the King's Indian, we are looking at one of 2 pawn breaks, right? One of 3 pawn breaks, I suppose. You're looking to play either c6, c5, or f5. And so every moment of every step in the first 20 or so moves, you're thinking, okay, do I play f5, opening the position? Do I play f5, closing the position, and then aim for some different pawn break on the king side? Do I play c5, trying to close the position? Do I play c5, opening the position? What are the pluses and minuses of each of these? And here I think this is a very instructive example of, do I play f5 or do I play c5? Obviously, me with Stockfish, I know that c5 is the move here. But I think that just looking at the pieces on the board, you don't have to do serious calculation to figure out which is the correct pawn break. Because White's pieces haven't exactly abandoned the king side. You know, this queen's still doing work. This bishop is still doing work. This rook is still doing work. On the other hand, the only piece that we have aimed at the king side after the f5 break, let's imagine that f and e pawns are just completely off the board. The only active pieces we have really pointed in that direction are the rook and the knight. Maybe the queen. Maybe the bishop. Right? And then you look at White's pieces and you see, White's really ready. You know, White has the far more advanced plan in this position. And then you also look at the position of the queen on b3. There was just knight b3, knight takes, knight c5 takes b3. You look at the position of the queen, you think, if I don't stop c5, if I have f5 and c5, and this position opens up, I'm going to be wasting a lot of time with my king. And so you think about these different considerations of in between the f5 and c5 breaks, and ultimately I think you just have to decide, okay, c5 is the correct move because f5 simply opens up the position in a way that's not exactly favorable for the black pieces. Because while yes, you're getting in the f5 break, what you're really doing is opening your king, and your open king is actually helping White's queenside attack. So instead, you need to shore up the queenside attack for the moment. If takes, knight takes, and then you have this great outpost, right? It's not better for black according to the computer, but the hell with the computer. c5, and then, you know, here it is. We've shored up our weakness for a moment, and now we can get in the break. Because this one step that we took on the queen side to delay White's attack has allowed us a little bit more additional time to get in our attack on the king side. So I think that's a very instructive example of how do you make this decision of whether or not to play c5 or whether or not to play f5. That said, it's a difficult position to play, and again, I think this really comes out of the decision to play knight d7, which is one of the most commonly played moves in the position, but one that I think is just not as harmonious as other moves are. Even knight h5 I think is better than knight d7. But I'm not exactly in a position to say that 100 years of theory or whatever is bullshit, right? Something interesting about knight e8 is that knight e8 is Alireza Firouza's move of choice. And Firouza played this against Grishuk in May of 2020. I don't know exactly at what event it was. And then 2 months later, Grishuk played this against Anish Giri So it was so persuasive that Firouzja is the modern influencer for the knight e8 line and has persuaded other grandmasters to take up the mantle. Let's pause there. I think that's an instructive line in the King's Indian about what's happening on the queen side, what's happening on the king side, and how do you weigh the f5 and c5 options. I hope that was as useful for any other King's Indian players out there as it is for me to study the position. Until the next time, good luck with your own chess journeys. Bye for now.